Hello, everyone, and welcome to this rather short session. We will look into water's essential role in mitigating climate change. And you will be able to ask questions in the Pathable platform. So if there is a question popping up, please write it there and we will try to answer it during the event. And if there is no time for that, then we will answer it after the event. So please just go back to this event page and see the answers later. My name is Malin Lundberg Ingemarsson, and I am working at CIWI, International Policy. And today we will start with me giving an introduction to a report that we are working on the topic of water and mitigation. And we will then meet with three of the experts that are contributing to the report. And that is Lan Wang Erlandsson from Stockholm Resilience Center. Welcome, Lan.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Nice to meet you.
And we have Fabian Stenzel from Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research. Welcome, Fabian.
Hi, hello everyone.
And we have Noreen Faisa Anisha from Oregon State University. Welcome, Noreen.
Hello, and thank you, Malin.
Thank you all. Okay, so let's start here. IPCC recently launched a new report, and the findings are quite alarming, to say the least. And one of the main messages in the report is that we need to act now in order to keep the temperature within these 1.5 or 2 degrees temperature rise. And in climate action, we are working on two fronts. We are adapting to the changing climate, and we are mitigating climate change by reducing global warming. And this can be done by reducing greenhouse gas emissions and enhancing carbon storage and carbon sinks. And in the climate crisis, global warming is hitting the water cycle particularly hard. We're saying that the climate crisis is the water crisis. Next slide, please. And this year, we have witnessed many events that are extreme events that are really showing how interlinked the water cycle and the climate cycle are. And for example, that is the floodings in Germany and Belgium, and the floodings in China, but also the heat waves in several places in the world, like in North America. And so far, countries have mainly considered water perspectives in their strategies for climate adaptation, while water in mitigation is rarely taken into consideration. And therefore, CIWI, together with partner organizations, are bringing water and mitigation links forward in a report. In climate action, we need to know which measures or which solutions to invest in order to reduce global temperature rise. And traditionally, we have been is there a problem with the sharing of? Okay, let's go. Traditionally, we have been focusing a lot on technical solutions, but now we are more and more also looking into nature-based solutions. And most mitigation measures, they either require fresh water to be effective, or they influence or modifies water, for example, by impacting water quality or hydrological flows and rainfall patterns. In this report, we will give a scientific overview and assessment of freshwater's role in and for climate mitigation. You can go back one slide, please. Perfect, thank you. We will present leverage points for countries and companies and so on how to take fresh water into consideration in their climate strategies. And we will identify high potential as well as high risk mitigation measures, both technical and nature-based, from different sectors such as water systems and energy systems and different ecosystems. Yes, now let's take a step back and look at the greater perspective at the global water cycle. Welcome again, Lan Wang Erlandsson.
Thank you, Marlene.
You will talk about water cycle feedbacks in the Earth system.
Yes, as Marlene mentioned, we're looking at the entire freshwater cycle in this report, both the freshwater that we can see and touch, but also the more invisible flows like precipitation and evaporation. We take this approach because the entire water cycle is the bloodstream of the planet Earth and intertwined with all Earth system processes. As such, more or less, all mitigation measures both modify and directly rely on water cycle functioning.
In what way would you say?
Water is life, not only because all living organisms are in direct need of water for our metabolism, but also because water sustains the habitat that we rely on by transporting, regulating nutrient cycle, mediating biogeochemical cycle, including the carbon cycle. And it's also an essential part of the climate system. Think clouds, air humidity, precipitation, which all affect radiative heat, carbon, and water balances, atmospheric circulation, and the weather that we experience on a daily basis. So, for example, in the forest chapter of this report, we look at the range of forest-related mitigation measures. This includes avoiding deforestation, avoiding forest degradation, afforestation, reforestation, restoration, and various forest management measures. So whereas afforestation and reforestation are often estimated to have a very large mitigation potential in terms of gigatons of carbon, to attain this higher level of mitigation potential, there will be a substantial reliance on water and also trade-offs with water yields in rivers, streams, and groundwater. Avoiding deforestation, on the other hand, as a mitigation measure, have substantial co-benefits and synergies with the water cycle interaction, thanks to these water cycle interactions. So avoiding deforestation not only protects a particular part of the forest that is protected, but also protects the integrity of the entire regional water cycle that the forest is helping to sustain, as we see here. So it prevents drought and fire over a much larger region, and also lets all the surrounding and interdependent ecosystem help us sequester and store carbon.
I see. So would you say that water is our friend in climate mitigation?
We need to let water be our friend. So extensive observation-based analysis suggests that the tropical forests have already peaked as net carbon sinks. The Amazon peaked much earlier, in the 90s, and the Congo peaked more recently, but they peaked both as net carbon sinks. So their ability to absorb carbon would continue to decline due to slower tree growth and higher tree mortality caused by an increasingly hotter and drier climate. But this also means that rapid climate mitigation can pay off. So if you're able to avoid the most severe climate change, avoid deforestation, and prevent ecosystem destruction, and thereby also the most dire disruptions to the water cycle, we can actually benefit from the carbon absorbing capabilities that forests are providing to us for free.
I see. So what would you say are the main takeaways here?
Yes, one, I think that we need to roll out the mitigation measures rapidly so that the water cycle processes in the Earth system stay our friend as much as possible. There are many scenarios for how to achieve the Paris Agreement targets. but they all require not only a very rapid reductions in fossil fuel emissions, they also rely on biosphere services in terms of carbon sinks in forest, agriculture systems, and aquatic systems, which Noreen will talk about later. And in many cases, also assume that anthropogenic CO2 removal, including BECCS, which Fabian will in a minute explain. And two, we need to be ambitious and scale up the mitigation targets so that we are on the right side of the margin. We are already seeing unpredictable tipping points, surprising events, as we have experienced this summer. And we also have underestimations in model, as we saw in the case with when models are compared to observations. And it seems that the models are overestimating their carbon sink strength. And three, climate is already changing. So we need to plan and scale plan the implementation of mitigation measures so that they are resilient to increasing water cycle disruptions and account for that many of these mitigation measures are dependent on water, which might be changing in the changing climate. So water can be both a friend and foe, and we want water to stay our friend as much as possible, but we also need to account for cases when this friendship is already fading.
Thank you so much, Lan, for explaining how these rather complex Earth system processes rely on the water cycle. Now we will learn more about bioenergy as a source of renewable and clean energy. Again, welcome, Fabian Stenzel.
Thank you, Molly.
What is BECCS?
Yeah, so BECCS stands or is short for bioenergy with carbon capture and storage. And it is a maybe promising negative emission technology, which is based on biomass plantations combined with a carbon capture and storage process. So basically fast-growing trees or grass species are cultivated and then regularly harvested for their biomass. And then this biomass is either converted to biofuels or burned to generate electricity. And the produced carbon dioxide from both these pathways is then captured and stored in geologic reservoirs, for example, an old oil or gas field.
And why is that needed?
Yeah, to combat climate change, we need to switch to carbon-free energy carriers as soon as possible. And for most of the current below 2 degree scenarios, BECCS plays a major role for the generation of electricity. But it also provides the potential to create negative emissions. And that means to actively reduce the CO2 content of the atmosphere and, so to say, go back in time. And economically, it is especially lucrative when there is a high carbon price due to these negative emissions.
Okay, but what does BECCS mean for water?
Yeah, so if BECCS is supposed to provide negative emissions of on the order of 5 gigatons of carbon per year, which is needed for 1.5 to 2 degree scenarios, then we need huge plantation areas. And as a result, they will consume a lot of green water from the soils, but also, and this is very likely, they will need irrigation, so blue water on top. We found in a recent literature review that they will be needed, but the magnitude is not yet clear. So they vary a lot. And the blue water withdrawals for bioenergy could become even similar to that of the industry and household sector, and thus stand in close competition with the food producing agriculture. Could you show the next slide, please? So in this figure, we see on the right side, the ranges for the water demand in the different sectors. And then on the left side, we see them stacked on top of each other, indicating the total global sum of potential water withdrawals. And as you can see, this is withdrawals, but they are already quite alarming.
And how would you say that this can be avoided?
Well, this will increase water stress. So we found this out in another paper from this year in Nature Communications. And on the next slide, you see the main figure from it. So there we've shown that globally, the area under high water stress globally in a scenario with irrigated decks. That is the one with the green arrow. And they start from the level of water stress today, or area under high water stress today. And then you see the change in this scenario in the future, in the year 2095. And you see that the BECCS scenario will lead to higher water stress compared to the pure climate change scenario, which is the orange arrow, without large-scale BECCS use. And yeah, so you asked how we can avoid this. So this is the third and the last scenario in the blue arrow. We could add sustainable water management, which is what we did in that scenario. And it's the only thing that compares this scenario to the pure BECCS, the green arrow. So we would limit withdrawals according to environmental flow requirements. But because this would reduce the productivity of the plantations, we would also need some sort of on-field water management to boost the productivity up. And overall, then this would lead to the same amount of negative emissions and energy, but lower impacts on water stress. So that having said, we think that BECCS might not be the only negative emission technology that we have to expect in the future, but rather that there should be a portfolio of several of these. And then we would hope for some synergies, which would also additionally reduce the dependence on fresh water. Thanks.
I see. Thank you so much, Fabian, for explaining why we need to consider the water cycle in our plans for bioenergy. Now let's move on to a nature-based solution, looking at inland water ecosystems. Again, welcome, Noreen, Faisa, and Isha.
Thank you.
Why are inland waters important for mitigating climate change?
Before I begin, I'd like to clarify what we mean by inland waters in this chapter. So we are referring to streams, rivers, lakes, reservoirs, estuary, as well as freshwater and coastal wetlands, such as swamps, peatlands, bogs, fens, mangroves, salt marshes, things like that. Well, most aquatic environments can work as greenhouse gas emission sources and sinks. Particularly, we know about wetlands, especially peatlands and blue carbon ecosystems store large amount of carbon. Peats cover only 3% of the world's surface, but have the potential to sequester 30% of global emission. And kind of similar for blue carbon ecosystems as well, they sequester a lot of carbon.
And why would you say that we should be concerned about wetlands?
Well, the concern about the wetlands is that they're the most rapidly declining ecosystems in the world. They're declining 3 times faster than forests. And as Lan discussed, our net carbon sink in Amazonian rainforest is declining. When wetlands are drained, disturbed, or destroyed, they emit the carbon they have stored for thousands of years. So when we do not protect the wetlands, we not just lose our future natural carbon storages, we emit all the carbon that these wetlands had stored from the past. So now that we are on our race to net zero by 2050, losing carbon storages as well as emitting the stored carbon can be a very big roadblock.
So how would you say it is with other freshwater ecosystems?
If you go to the slide, the next one. Yeah, thank you. Inland waters can work, again, both as source and sink of greenhouse gases. There are some studies that suggest river reaches that go through forested land are likely to act as greenhouse gas sink compared to reaches that go through urban landscapes. The nutrient input, both carbon and nitrogen, leads most rivers in the world to be supersaturated with greenhouse gas, resulting in net sources of greenhouse gas emission to the atmosphere, primarily in the form of methane and nitrous oxide. Human activities and global warming both increase emission, not just for rivers, but also for lakes, reservoirs, and other lentic waters. But here's the catch. The new IPCC report talks a great deal about how little we know about emissions from rivers. Our understanding of the emission from rivers is constrained by a very small number of observations scattered around the world. There are simply not many studies done for emissions from river. And there are varying measurement techniques, varying upscaling methods. So we know that rivers are emitting, but we do not really have an organized, concrete knowledge of how and what to do about it. To really achieve that net zero world, we need to understand that emission from river.
Yes, that sounds reasonable. What would you say is the best selling point for attracting more attention to inland waters in mitigating climate change?
I think we all know water is a key tool for nature-based solutions, from efficient disaster risk reduction to recovering biodiversity, to ensuring food security. For example, urban wetlands can help the urban flooding severity, can help with urban heat island problem. We know mangroves can protect the communities from extreme weather events like tropical cyclones. And these are nothing new. But now these are rediscovered and reintroduced as effective solutions compared to hard infrastructure. Also, there are substantial adaptation benefits from water as well. So I think designing schemes with the full set of ecosystem services of water in mind, alongside the carbon sequestration potential, can maximize the benefit. We can build a synergy between climate adaptation and mitigation through water.
I see. Thank you so much, Noreen, for explaining why inland water ecosystems are important for mitigation, but also for raising this important issue of co-benefits. In the upcoming report, both co-benefits and trade-offs from these different mitigation measures will be a very important part. Additionally, the report will also have a strong governance component, where we will look into water mitigation leverage points and risk hotspots globally, but also integrated and cross-sectoral approaches. I want to leave you with a few key takeaways, and that is that water's role for mitigating climate change is much greater than previously has been acknowledged. And taking fresh water into consideration in policy and practice has the potential to be an enabler for improved mitigation. More findings will be presented at the Water and Climate Pavilion at COP26 in Glasgow in early November this year. And the report will be launched next year. Let's see what time it is. We have reached an end of this session. Thank you all so much for listening in. If you have any questions or comments, please contact us. Here is our emails. And have a great continued World Water Week.